to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of the Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean, and I am the creative director, and we really appreciate you joining us for today's episode. While it might be my voice you hear each week on this podcast, our tour guides in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto are the heart and soul of our company. In the episode, I am thrilled to share with you some of their stories in their own words about the eerie, unusual, and downright frightening things that have happened to them in and around the haunted buildings that we tour. These stories really illustrate you never know what will happen when you're a storyteller or a guest on the Haunted Walk. But before we get to that, as we release the episode, Halloween is just a little bit more than a week away, and the excitement and the anticipation is clearly building. If you have not bought your tickets yet for one of our in-person ghost tours in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, now is the time because things are starting to sell out, and this is absolutely the best time of the year to join us. If you live a little too far away to join us in person, we would still love to be part of your Halloween plans. Our virtual haunted campfires continue every Saturday night throughout October. This upcoming weekend, we have our Don't Mess with Texas Ghost Campfire with our friends from Galveston, Texas. Having heard a sneak peek of some of the stories, we are in for quite a campfire. The following weekend, October 30th, will be our special Devil's Night Fact or Fiction Campfire, where us storytellers from the Haunted Walk are going to try to trick you into believing stories that are 100% untrue. Can you spot when we're lying? Finally, if you're looking for something really spooky and fun you can do without leaving the house, I'd recommend trying our Haunting at Home. This is our crowd-sourced experiment with the paranormal. We're trying to determine how many of us may live in haunted homes. Are you brave enough to see if yours might be one of them? For information about our in-person ghost tours, our virtual haunted campfires, and our haunting at home, please visit our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. We'd love to connect with you on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, all four at Haunted Walk. And if you're enjoying the episodes, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to us, and we always appreciate a 5-star review as a little treat in our Haunted Walk goodie bag. Our first story will be told by Zach, one of our tour guides in Toronto. Now, it's a bit of a meta story, as the tale is about our tour guides from Kingston taking our tour guides from Ottawa and Toronto on a tour of Fort Henry National Historic Site. Needless to say, this sleepover did not quite go according to plan.
In late August of 2019, approximately 24 Haunted Walk guides from across our 3 cities converged on Fort Henry in Kingston as a way to socialize and spend the night alone in the fort. We were given a tour by one of our own through Fort Henry, with one story in particular becoming more than just a tale for some of us. To provide some context, in December of 1837, members of William Lyon Mackenzie's rebel army were arrested in Toronto. They were to be shipped to Tasmania, where they would be forced to live out the rest of their lives away from home. The rebels were transported to Fort Henry, awaiting their departure to exile. The men were held in a ground-level casement, but soon discovered that it shared a wall with an adjacent casement that had a trap door leading down to the artillery room below. This meant a chance of escape. Over the next several days, the rebels chipped away at the newly mortared dividing wall with improvised tools until the conditions to escape were right. On August 4th, 1838, a massive thunderstorm rolled into Kingston, providing the perfect backdrop of rumbling thunder to mask the sound of the casement wall collapsing. 15 rebels spilled into the next room and down the hatch to the limestone tunnel below. They ran to the openings where the cannons were poised to fire into the dry ditch, the 40-foot wide area between the inner fort walls and the external defense wall. Scrambling up the 30-foot outer wall using ladders cobbled together from scraps of wood, they fled the fort, stole rowboats, and rowed to the United States. In the end, only 2 of the escaped rebels were ever recaptured by the British. In recent years, people spending time near the opening into the dry ditch where the rebels escaped have occasionally reported the sounds of heavy footfalls approaching from the tunnel, followed by disembodied voices shouting in the dry ditch moments later. Following our late-night tour of the centuries-old stronghold, we all wandered off in groups, some heading to bed, and many others hoping to find some sign of the supernatural. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, myself and a handful of Toronto guides exited the parade square and went up to the advanced battery on the southwest end of the fort. As we sat overlooking the city of Kingston, we were delighted by thick black clouds rolling toward us, illuminating the sky with pink-tinged lightning. We became aware of the echo of masculine voices yelling from behind us. The voices bounced off the walls of the shops, making it difficult to pinpoint the exact location, but it sounded as though it was coming from the base of the ramp into the fort. After the persistence of the shouts, I headed toward the fort looking for the source. When I descended the ramp and reached the equipoise bridge, I found no one, and with the dry ditch sealed off for construction, there was nowhere to go but into the fort's parade square. It was abandoned, save for 2 other Toronto guides who lay in the center of the square watching the stars. They hadn't seen or heard anyone in quite some time. So with no answer to the mystery shouting, we rejoined the others. As it neared 3 o'clock in the morning, a small gaggle of Toronto guides headed for the classroom, believed to be the most haunted room at Fort Henry. We sat in the dark with recording devices and a night vision camera hoping for something to happen when the masculine shouting began again. For a second time, it sounded as though it was coming from the dry ditch. I again went to check, and on the way I heard voices coming from an opened ground-level door leading to the officers' barracks. I peeked inside to find a few guides from a different city, and I inquired if they had been shouting. They hadn't been. Soon our group, ever growing in size, was gathered in the parade square listening intently for the shouting. By this time the sky was alive with pink flashes of the approaching thunderstorm, and droplets of cold rain were beginning to splatter down. We sought shelter, many of us returning to separate rooms for bed, but myself and a second guide could again hear the shouting from the dry ditch. The following morning, over breakfast, some Ottawa guides were sharing an experience they'd had the previous night around 2 a.m. They'd brought a Ouija board into the artillery room where the rebels had escaped into the dry ditch. While quietly chatting, the guides could hear heavy footfalls rushing toward them from the damp, narrow tunnel. The group was expecting to see more guides at any moment emerge into the artillery room, but nobody appeared. I sat in a stunned silence as I realized that their experience had happened mere moments before the first time that we heard the shouting from the dry ditch. Did we hear an echo of the rebel escape from more than 180 years earlier, perhaps brought on by a similar August thunderstorm? Is it possible that the energy of that original storm, mixed with the intense fear of that high-stakes escape, had somehow become etched, like a vinyl record, onto the limestone walls of the dry ditch? Were we merely an audience for the performance?
Our next story is told by Jacqueline, one of our tour guides in Ottawa, who had a very unexpected yet familiar run-in after one of her tours.
Here in Ottawa, in Confederation Park, just down the street from the National Arts Center, there's a fountain. It and its identical twin used to stand side by side in Trafalgar Square in London, England, and they were there from 1843 to 1948. Both were donated to Canada after the Second World War, and the one in Confederation Park was dedicated to Ottawa's founder, Lieutenant Colonel John By, in 1955. Passing through the park, you wouldn't assume there'd be anything abnormal about the fountain, and you probably wouldn't guess that, around the turn of the century, the body of a man who had been murdered was found floating in the waters of one of these identical fountains. We at the Haunted Walk aren't entirely sure which of these fountains the murder is associated with, but I had an experience that gave me a little bit of bias. I had just finished my tour shift for the night, and I was heading back to my car. Confederation Park is a nice shortcut, especially in the autumn. It's quiet and there aren't many people around, and the fountain had been turned off for the year. There was a man sitting on the edge of the fountain, a stone lip that runs all the way around its base. He caught my attention as I was passing and asked if I had just finished my tour. I assumed he'd been along with one of my coworkers, so I laughed and told him yes, I had, and then asked if he'd been a guest that evening. He said no, but that he always enjoyed listening to our stories when we passed by his fountain. I'm not ashamed to admit I was a little unnerved, so I bid him good night and continued on my way. I'd only taken a few steps when something made me stop and turn around. But that man, any trace of him in the park, had vanished into thin air. This was a strange enough experience on its own, but when I got home that night and told my father about it, he was quick to remind me that this wasn't the first time this had happened to me in the park. When I was younger, maybe 5 or 6, we were in the park for some sort of event, and he left me sitting alone on the edge of the fountain, just for a minute. When he came back, he said that I was sitting there, happily chatting away with no one. When he asked me who I was talking to, apparently I gestured to the open air next to me and said, "This nice man."
One of the interesting patterns we've seen develop over the years is that ghosts of people who were very strict in their lifetimes often seem to carry this love of following the rules into the afterlife. Our first story will be from Zoe, one of our tour guides in Toronto, who had a customer relay a story to her about Mackenzie House, and that will be followed by Sarah, one of our tour guides in Ottawa, who had a run-in with a security guard at the normal school.
A gentleman on one of my tours at Black Creek Pioneer Village shared this story with me, about an experience he had at Mackenzie House when he was a child. For anyone who hasn't had the chance to visit, Mackenzie House was the last home of Toronto's very first mayor, William Lyon Mackenzie. It is a row house, except all of the other houses in the row were demolished back in 1936. It's now operated by the City of Toronto's Museum and Heritage Services as a historic house museum. Inside the house, there are 3 levels open to the public: the basement, the main floor, and the second floor. The basement has the kitchen, the main floor has a parlor and a dining room, and the second floor has the bedrooms. There is a 4th floor of the house, the top level. However, it is a staff-only area and is cordoned off when the museum is open. Behind the house, the museum has added a hallway to connect the house to where Mackenzie's print shop used to stand. He ran a newspaper as well as being a politician. They've recreated the print shop and added modern bathrooms and a gift shop for visitors. I should also note that Mackenzie died in the house, in his bedroom, in 1861. My guest shared with me that when he visited the museum, he was 8 or 9 years old, and he was visiting with his mom and his older sister. They'd finished their tour through the building, and his mom was looking around the gift shop. He and his sister snuck back into the house to look around more. They ended up on the second floor and decided to try to explore the top level of the house, which, as I mentioned, is off limits. As they started to climb the steps to the top level, their mother, who was still in the gift shop, shouted for them to get back there and that they were leaving immediately. She didn't tell them until many years later, but she had a very clear male voice say in her ear, "Collect your children and get out." My guest said that he returned to the house a few years later on a school trip when he was 12 or so, and felt incredibly unwelcome and nauseous the entire time he was inside. He has since refused to return to that house again.
My encounter happened one night while I was giving our original haunted walk of Ottawa, and it happened at our stop at the Normal School. The building of the Normal School is located on the grounds of Ottawa's City Hall. Today, it is used as part of the City of Ottawa's offices. But from its construction in 1875 up until the 1970s, it served as Ottawa's only teachers' college. The title Normal School refers to the word normative, meaning standards and rules, as a place student teachers would learn the standards and rules of teaching. Many of our stories about the Normal School come to us from the security guards who have worked the grounds of City Hall. That evening, one of the security guards came outside while my group was stopped by the building. I asked the guard if they had any stories of their own that they'd like to share. They told my group that if you are making too much noise in the building after 10 p.m., you will be shushed. Shh. If you ignore the first shushing, you will be shushed again. Shh. And if you ignore those first 2 shushings, you will be told to be quiet. It seems like the ghosts of the Normal School are still upholding the rules of their classrooms, even to this day.
If we could, we would love to provide every guest who comes on our tours with their own paranormal experience. Of course, it doesn't really work that way. And I would say over my time with the Haunted Walk, by far, the most rare sighting is an actual apparition. A body. A ghostly body. And because it is so rare, I am very eager to share this story told by Leonard, one of our tour guides in Ottawa, who very recently had one of his customers have the ultimate haunted walk experience.
Hi, I'm Leonard. I'm a guide in the Ottawa area and conduct tours of the Mackenzie King Estate on weekends. If you're unfamiliar with the estate, it is a 500-acre property located in the heart of the Gatineau Hills, about 30 minutes north of Ottawa. This estate was privately owned by Canada's 10th Prime Minister, William Lyon Mackenzie King, who upon his death in 1950 willed it to the Government of Canada for the enjoyment of all Canadians. King, who apart from holding the record as Canada's longest-serving Prime Minister, is also well known for his interest in spiritualism throughout his life. The estate comprises 3 distinct properties: Kingswood, Moorside, and the Farm. The Farm is the official residence of the Speaker of the House of Commons, so is not accessible to the public. During our 75-minute tour, we stroll the grounds of both Kingswood and Moorside, including the Abbey Ruins found at Moorside. These ruins are a collection of architectural relics made of cut stone, and King brought to the estate which he believed provided a romantic air. In addition to those relics found at the Abbey Ruins, others can be found throughout the estate's walking trails. In early October, it was an incredibly foggy evening. A couple had booked a tour time earlier than mine. However, they became lost in the fog en route, so it was determined that they would join my tour. However, they still had not arrived by the time that my tour started, so I had to leave without them. When they did finally show up, the site supervisor decided that she would walk them to catch up to my tour. On the way, she shared a couple of the stories they had missed. When she handed them over to me, she requested that I tell one more story that she had not had time to share. So, once the tour was over, I recounted that story that they had not heard earlier. Once I finished, the gentleman very reluctantly asked if anyone had ever reported any strange experiences on the tours, to which I responded affirmatively. He then went on to describe that after I'd finished my story at the Abbey Ruins, he distinctly heard in his right ear a male voice say, "Hello." He quickly spun around to see who it was, yet there was no one close by him at all. When he finished sharing that with me, his wife then said that as our group departed from the Abbey Ruins, she turned, looked back, and could clearly see a silhouette of a male figure standing in the fog. Both were genuinely shocked, but fortunately neither was the least bit upset at these experiences that they had had. I have to say I am grateful to the kind spirit of William Lyon Mackenzie King for really knocking that couple's experience to another level during their tour. Despite getting lost and arriving late, the couple ended up taking home a very real experience from the haunted walk that they will not soon forget.
We love when customers on our tours share their own experiences or their own family's experiences at some of our haunted locations. It's particularly amazing when their own personal stories match up with some of the accounts that we have been sharing for decades.
Hello there, my name is Michelle. I am one of the guides at the Haunted Walk Kingston office. On one of my tours about a year ago, I was asked by one of the ladies on our original Kingston walk, "Michelle, what is one of the most disturbing things that's happened to you while doing these tours?" And so I told her, well, since you asked, and we just so happened to be outside where it happened, I pointed to the house across the street from where we were standing. I said that I was once telling that story, and while my group is very much concentrated, I realized that across the street, the man who lives in that house, he's walking through his rooms that are brightly lit. It's dark outside, so we can clearly see into his place. And this man, he's walking through the rooms naked. So I had to summon every single ounce of professionality in me, not to mention anything at all, because if you say anything like, don't turn around, people are obviously going to look. So I just kind of put it aside and tried to shove it into my subconscious, and then later on when I got home, I had a great laugh about that. But more recently, at the end of September, I had 3 lovely ladies come with me on the original walk again, and after sharing my story outside of the Chalmers United Church, where we usually tell about multiple women specifically who over the years have been found practicing at the organ, who have been chased or haunted by an evil spirit that's there. They all usually describe it the same way, and after I told the story, one of the women told me that she used to attend the church when she was a little kid. And not only that, 2 of the ladies in that group actually got married at that church. But when she was younger, there's a day after service, her family is gathered outside on the grass about where we were standing, when her mom suddenly realizes that she's left her purse inside of the church. So she went back inside alone to grab it, and there's no one else. And as she's approaching her purse, she suddenly gets pinned against the wall. She says it comes out of nowhere, and it's exactly like how we describe it. It's this dark, evil spirit. But what's more, it's this dark figure with its arms almost like it's looming over her with outstretched straight towards the ceiling. Though her purse is just a few meters away from her, she cannot move. And actually, it took her many years before she eventually told her daughter about what actually happened that day.
It seems each year brings varying amount of paranormal activity at the sites we tour. It's not always consistent. It can be up and down. But this summer, the amount of reports we had from our 2 pioneer villages where we offer tours has really been quite staggering. The first one to talk about is Upper Canada Village in Morrisburg, Ontario. And our tour guide Aaron, who gives tours there, as well as in Ottawa, will share a variety of accounts that guests and tour guides have experienced.
Upper Canada Village is the pioneer village which is located near Morrisburg, Ontario. It's along the edge of the St. Lawrence Seaway, which is the border between Canada and the United States. Upper Canada Village represents a pioneer village from 1866, which is the year before Confederation. But the village itself was only created much later. In the 1950s, the Canadian and American governments decided they wanted to expand the St. Lawrence Seaway, and there were 10 villages that were flooded in the process. The people were told they had to relocate, and they relocated some of the old historical buildings as well, bringing them together to establish the pioneer village that we still visit today. I tend to suspect that they might have brought their ghosts to the village too, because almost every time that I've given a tour at Upper Canada Village, at least one person on the tour has had a ghostly experience. So unfortunately, I can't tell you all of the things that have happened, but I would like to share a few just in case, because who knows, they might even happen to you. This year, a woman on one of my tours came up to me as we were walking, and she said, "Are there any cannons in Upper Canada Village?" I asked, "You mean today?" Because I figured she might have been referring to cannons back in the War of 1812, since Upper Canada Village is close to where the American and British soldiers fought in the Battle of Kleizer's Farm. She told me that she could hear the sound of cannons. I couldn't hear the cannons, but she said her cousin could hear them too. On another occasion, another woman who went into the Masonic Lodge said that while she was inside, she was convinced that her husband was right next to her. She had felt the presence of a man beside her. When she exited the building, she realized that her husband had been outside the entire time. She said that the presence had felt comfortable, which was why she had assumed it was her husband. It wasn't malevolent, and she hadn't felt unwelcome in the building, but she was very adamant that the presence was a man. Hearing or feeling things will tend to be the more common type of occurrences that happen on tours, but occasionally people will also see mysterious things as well. When we were on the path, a woman came up to me and she asked me whether there were any reenactors in the village. So I told her that all of the interpreters who usually work during the day had all gone home for the evening, and it was just us and the security guard. But she said that she was wondering about the events that the village occasionally runs where lots of reenactors come to reenact battles. She thought that maybe some of them might have been staying nearby or in the village. I said no. She said that she had seen a man in a white shirt running in the field right next to us, and she said that it couldn't have been a security guard because he was wearing the same kind of clothing that a historical soldier would have been wearing. Last but not least, though, I would like to share what happened on one night when I had a couple of paranormal investigators who came on my tour. They were equipped with a lot of fancy devices and they were taking readings all around the village, but they told me that the most reliable ghost detectors were actually their dogs. The 2 dogs were very well behaved, and they walked with their humans and they waited patiently and quietly outside each of the buildings, until we came to Willard's Hotel, which is supposed to be the most haunted building in the village. Before I even started to tell my story, the two dogs sat down on the corner at the front lawn, and they raised their heads and they started to howl.
By far, the most active site we have had this year is Black Creek Pioneer Village in Toronto. The amount of stories from customers and tour guides has simply been staggering. And there are several buildings in the property, each seemingly with their own ghosts and particular stories that come to light. However, this year, there has been no location like Berwick House. I would like to share a trio of stories with you from three of our tour guides, Michelle, Jack, and Sarah, who have all had unforgettable encounters inside what our tour guides believe is the most haunted building at Black Creek, Berwick House.
So I recently started giving our tour at Black Creek Pioneer Village. And if you've never been, it's a living museum with buildings that date from the 19th century. And by day, the interpreters, the staff there, they dress in period costume and they recreate a day in the life in 1867. It's very warm, it's very welcoming, it's really interesting, and I definitely recommend a visit if you've never been. But at night, the village is very different. It's pitch dark. It's dead quiet. It's perfect for telling ghost stories. Berwick House is one of the buildings that we visit on our tours. It was built in 1844, and it originally stood in Woodbridge in Ontario. Woodbridge used to be known as Berwick. On our tours, we tell the story of a mother and daughter who were visiting Berwick House by day. They were on the second floor, and they both began to feel very uncomfortable and very unwelcome. And at that moment, a clock somewhere in the building began to chime. The daughter felt in that moment somebody touch her cheek and cup her chin gently. She and her mother were so overcome that they ran downstairs, and the second that their feet hit the final stair, the clock stopped chiming. So you might think that that's coincidence, except we know that the clocks in Berwick House are not kept in working order. It's my first night giving tours at Black Creek Pioneer Village, and naturally it's Friday the 13th, and I'm already nervous. My group has been just fantastic up to this point. We're having a lot of fun. I tell the story of the mother and daughter, and we head into Berwick House together. So I'm leading them through sort of by lantern light, and they have their flashlights. And suddenly, the group behind me starts to scream. And I turn around and I say, hey guys, what's happening? And they go, shh, listen. And sure enough, we could hear. It was faint, it was staticky, but we could hear the sound of a clock chiming. So my group wanted to stay, and I was like, absolutely not. And we get outside and I check my own watch, and it wasn't the hour. So first of all, it was not, the clock chiming on the hour. And later that night, I double checked with the site supervisor. I asked, did they do some kind of demonstration with the clock today? Is there any reason that they might have wound it today? And I was told that no, as far as we know, the clocks are not kept in working order. It was only later that I was informed by another guide that we had done sort of a sweep of the site at the beginning of the season before we gave our first tours of the season. And he assured me that he had checked it himself and that the grandfather clock in Berwick House is not only not wound, not kept in working order, but doesn't even have chimes. After that, I was nervous heading into Berwick House, but nothing else happened until last week. And the staff at Black Creek Pioneer Village have set up an exhibit for Halloween at Berwick House. It's really neat. They've got Victorian mourning artifacts like jewelry made out of real human hair and a coffin displayed in the kitchen. So my group and I are in the kitchen, and I see, standing on the threshold between the kitchen and the pantry, the figure of a man. Corporeal, solid, a man with a wide-brimmed black hat. He has this sort of stoic, serious expression, and he's watching. And I would describe him as wearing farmer's clothing. I think that it's my eyes playing tricks on me, and I ask my group to shine their flashlights in that corner. There's nothing, but I hear the woman beside me gasp, and she says, "Did you see him too?" So once again, I got us out of there so fast, and afterward I asked the woman what she thought she had seen, and she described a man wearing a black, wide-brimmed hat, and she described him as having Letterkenny vibes. So if you've seen that show, very stoic, stiff, upright posture, and then a button-up kind of farmer's shirt. So after the fact, I find out that the coffin currently on display in Berwick House is usually stored in another building on site, the cabinet maker's shop. And I find out that the cabinet maker's shop is said to be haunted by its own ghost, the ghost of a man with a black, wide-brimmed hat.
My name is Jack. I am one of the tour guides up at Black Creek Pioneer Village in Toronto, and I've been doing that tour for the last 4.5 years now, which means a lot of things have happened along the way, but one of my favorite stories is a little bit of a funnier one, maybe a bit more lighthearted. It's really common for us to get people on our tours who tell us that they have some kind of extra sensitive ability when it comes to some of the ghosts, mediums, or people who can just pick up on energy. And sometimes the really interesting thing is they'll tell us experiences or things that happen in the area before we even mention those stories. And I always love when that happens. It makes it really fun for me. So one particular evening, I was up at Black Creek, and this was about 2 years ago. And I had a really incredible group of 4 women on my tour who had told me they were all mediums and working mediums, so actually doing it for their jobs. And throughout our time in the village together, at the beginning of the tour, they would frequently tell me points of stories before I had even mentioned those parts of the tour. Things like seeing a little boy before I even mentioned him, that kind of thing. And so we were having a lot of fun. We started to head towards the ending of our tour, which kind of leads up to some of the spookier houses. And we approached this one particular building called the Berwick House. And this building is considered to be maybe one of the most haunted buildings on the property. It was built in 1844, and it is a really good example of a bit more of an upper middle class type of lifestyle. So it's a really beautiful home. And as soon as we walked up to the front of the house, one of the women in my group pointed to the top left window, which is a very frequently pointed out window on our tours over the last few years. So she points at this window and she looks at me and she says, "The woman inside is active tonight and she is really mad that people keep walking with their shoes on in the house." something along those lines. And I thought this was very funny because I'm very accustomed to scarier things happening on the tours, people becoming frightened. I've never actually been told that a ghost was displeased because of something so mundane. So I really enjoyed that being pointed out to me, and we had a good little laugh about it. Then we ended our tour. It was a very successful tour. I thanked everybody for coming, and because it was the last tour of the evening, I then had to go and lock all the buildings up with our site supervisor. And doing this, we would usually just make small talk, and I would frequently tell the different experiences that had happened on my tours. So I was with our supervisor, Keisha, and we were walking, and I decided to share this funny little anecdote with her about the carpet. And she, after hearing it, just stopped in her tracks. We were in the middle of the pathway. It was pitch dark. She just turns and looks at me, and she goes, "Jack, you do know that they just changed the carpets in that house about 2 days ago." And I was stunned. I had not known that. So my theory is that the woman of the house, who is the one haunting the building, was upset that she had these brand new carpets and people were tracking dirt all through the building wearing their shoes. So out of respect for her, for about a solid month, I would say, whenever we got to Berwick House, I would actually invite my guests to take their shoes off if they felt comfortable doing so, in order to try to pay respect to the fact that she wanted to keep her house clean. It was really fun while it lasted. Obviously, I couldn't do it for a very long time, but that little month where I did do it was a lot of fun.
Hello, I'm Sarah. I'm one of the Toronto guides for the Haunted Walk. While giving tours in the Black Creek Pioneer Village in the north of Toronto, I've had a lot of experiences. I would say my most unsettling experience happened on a tour where I only had 2 guests. One was a teenage girl who couldn't have been more than 14. Throughout the tour, she was terrified. Her friend had to drag her into the buildings we entered, and she was always in a rush to get outside again. The whole time she chatted away, talking over her own fear. But from the first moment she saw it, she was strangely interested in one house. The Berwick House. Berwick House was built in 1844 in Woodbridge, and ever since it was relocated to the Pioneer Village, many believe it might be the most haunted building on site. This girl had never been to the village before, and as she kept staring over at Berwick House, she started to ask me questions about it. About that house. What was the history of that house? Would we go inside that house? Who is it that haunts that house? Berwick House is the last building we enter on the tour. It's said to be haunted by a woman mourning the loss of a child, and the spirit shows particular interest in children who enter the home, especially young girls. When I finished telling the story outside the home, the girl on my tour practically pushed past me to get in. She was the opposite of how she'd been in every other building. Staring, moving slowly to look at everything. And she was dead, silent. When I said it was time to go, she turned and asked me quietly, seriously, if we could stay just a little bit longer. She asked if we could stand completely still, completely silent. I thought maybe she'd seen or heard something, so I agreed. We stood there in silence as the girl stared up the stairs to the second floor, where people often feel or hear the presence of this mournful woman. The girl didn't seem scared now. She just stared, silent, unmoving. Finally, I said it really was time to leave. Her friend had to drag her out of Berwick House the way he had dragged her into every other building on that tour. Once we were outside, I asked her why. Why had she wanted to stand in silence in Berwick House? All she would tell me is that she felt like she had to. That it felt like something she needed to do. A ways down the path from Berwick House, I told the conclusion story of the tour. And when we went to walk away, The girl froze. Then she spun around to face back down the path, back into the village. She asked if either her friend or I had said anything. We hadn't, and we told her as much. The girl was terrified again, but still her friend had to coax her to follow us out of the village. She kept looking back. She kept trying to walk back down the path, back into the village. Back towards Berwick House? Eventually, she told us what she had heard. She had heard a woman's voice, like a woman had spoken to her. It wasn't until after a lot of poking and prodding as we led her away from the village that the girl finally told us what this woman's voice had said. And I'll never forget the look on this girl's face as she told me. Apparently, this woman told her, "Come back."
Thank you for joining us for this special episode. And of course, a special thanks to Zach, Jacqueline, Zoe, Sarah, Leonard, Michelle, Aaron, Michelle, Jack, and Sarah for sharing their stories with us. And of course, a big thank you to all of our Haunted Walk tour guides who are working exceptionally hard right now to deliver awesome and entertaining ghost stories every single evening. For more information about our ghost tours and maybe meet some of the celebrities in our episode today, you can find tickets at hauntedwalk.com for the ghost tours in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto. There you can also find information about our virtual haunted campfires as well as the recordings. And there you can also get info on our Haunting at Home online paranormal adventure. A special thanks to our Haunted Talks team, including Michelle Dennis, our outstanding audio editor, and Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.filmmusic.io for the additional music. Full credits can be found on our website. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to us, and if you have a moment to put a 5-star review in our trick-or-treat bag, we'd be greatly appreciative. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.